Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so we just finished up liturgy, right, Mass, and it was great celebrating with y'all. Thoroughly impressed with how polite and reverent you guys were. I was absolutely mind blown. Very excited to do it again, but let's get into it. All right, so today we had some technical difficulties. All right, when it came to trying to get my first period honors up and running because my smartboard wasn't completely working yet, so we were struggling a little bit. All right, so we ended up playing a review game, right? So what we're going to do with this flip is we're going to use it to try and just wrap up Mesopotamia so we can get into Egypt a little bit tomorrow and possibly a little bit more next week. All right, so, but where we left off with Mesopotamia, we just talked about the Epic of Gilgamesh. We talked about cuneiform, writing. We talked about these other mind-blowing things, education systems, natural levees, irrigation systems, other amazingly cool things that actually are super, super important to these people, right? So really, really quickly, if we don't understand what an irrigation system is, please ask me in class, because for some reason, I feel like I went over it a little bit heavier with one class over the other because I'm not used to having two honor sections, all right? So, but let's get into it, shall we? So we left off talking about Gilgamesh, the flood systems, and then we were getting into the religious orders, right? Now, some of you immediately are like, whoa, Mr. Terry. You said that there were multiple other city-states, right? That there was Sumeria, Babylon, Acadians, all these other different people. How is it possible that they have a unified religious order within an entire region? And to that, I would say, whoa, Isabel. That is an insanely accurate question. All right, so because here's the thing. There's this thing called cultural diffusion, right? Just write it down. It's my favorite word in history. I think it makes so much sense and it perfectly explains so many things. Cultural diffusion is the spread of traits through war and trade, all right? So as these other city-states begin to kind of take over one another, right, and then also they start warring and trading with one another, they begin to share these ideas about religion, right? So let's talk about their religious orders and kind of what they believed in. So first and foremost, they are a polytheistic religion consisting of over 3,600 gods and demigods. That is an insanely intense system, right? So each individual village would sometimes create gods, things like that, demigods. And by the way, a demigod is a smaller god, as in not a primary god. Demi as in meaning smaller or half. Demi can sometimes mean a mythical figure that has been interbred with a human, or a demigod can also sometimes mean a smaller order god that only relates to certain things, right? So very, very big prominent Mesopotamian gods, though, that existed. You don't need to write this down, but it's just kind of neat. It's for example, Enlil. Enlil is the supreme god of the air, and then Ishtar is the goddess of fertility and life. Ishtar is a very, very cool one who has tons of theories about her. There was this old meme going around Instagram, which is 100% not accurate and not true. They were like, oh, Ishtar relates back to Easter. No, it doesn't, all right? Don't listen to that. That's a myth and a lie, all right? Now, there are some people, though, that think that there's a chance that Ishtar, the way that she was drawn, is actually the inspiration for a very specific business, all right? So some people believe some of the earliest Mesopotamian drawings of Ishtar actually have her as a mermaid with two tails, right? So now this is just some people believe this, right? We don't know if this is actually true or not because it's just such an old and dated religion. Now, some people believe that may have been the inspiration for the Greek and Roman mythological figure of a siren, right? A siren having two split tails, right? So Starbucks coffee actually has a siren as their business model, right? The woman with the crown and the tooth and those things right there, that's her tails. She's actually a mermaid or a siren, right? So really, really cool thing to kind of relate back to the stuff that we're talking about. Then you have, of course, An, which is the god of heaven, Enki, which is the god of water in the underworld, and Shamash, who is the god of sun and the giver of law, right? So now Ishtar, though, is my favorite one because Ishtar is a female goddess, and she actually is believed to have given birth to the world in a flood, right? So how cool is that, right? Very, very prominent female figure in a very early religious form. So speaking of how also their religion is interrelated to their government, because remember we were talking about it the other day, is which one came first, government or religion? Government or religion? Maybe they came at the same time, right? So now, but the position of king was enhanced and supported by their religious system, right? Because each kingship believed that they were created by gods and a king's power was divinely ordained, all right? There's actually a lot of very prominent Mesopotamian art Let me see if I can actually find one real quick, where a king is actually being bestowed upon them the ruling powers by the gods. Mesopotamian god/king carving. Right. I have one specifically in mind that I know. It's a man, and he's having the power bestowed upon him by... it's this one. Yeah, like so, right there. Now, so right here, actually, Mesopotamian gods and goddesses are very, very closely related because they believe that they are receiving their power from their religious order directly, right? So now, speaking of that, though, this idea is called like divine right to rule, which is not something that's very uncommon in history. It's going to pop up again in Europe when we get to the absolutist era in the 1500s, right? Now, each god, though, also is believed to have a control of certain things, and each city was ruled by a different god, so sometimes different. As these little cities intertwine, begin to trade and communicate with each other, that's how this big religious structure kind of expanded, almost like a spider web, right? It's just like continuing to grow, and they're bringing in new gods and demigods and new stories and new myths and things like that, right? Now, a really cool thing, though, write this down, higher order people in Mesopotamia as well were also priests, right? Now, priests believed that they actually had a way of communicating with the gods. They would actually slaughter a lamb, and the way that the guts and stomach and things like that spilled onto the floor was believed to be a way to actually read what the gods were trying to communicate with them. Almost like a tea leaves kind of situation, but not, which is super gross. All right, anyway, so now let's talk about, though, their major architecture, which not a lot of people know about, all right? So, unfortunately, I got to move my face, and you're going to get mad because it's going to go away. There we go. Now, so here we go. Ziggurats, right? So a ziggurat is like the Mesopotamian version of a pyramid, right? It's also, though, very important, the very first large-scale religious-based structures or large-scale structures, period, right? So it's made of layer upon layer of mud bricks in the shape of a pseudo-pyramid, but it looks much more kind of like a tiered cake, right? So if you look right here, this one down here in the bottom left, okay, there's actually like a wall that will go up, and then it sets in, and then a smaller square on top. It sets in, smaller square on top, sets in, smaller square on top. Because architecturally speaking, the retaining walls of the lower levels actually do a much better job of holding the structure up. Now, unfortunately, though, you're also going to get a heck of a workout because now you've also got a huge amount of stairs. Now, this is the ziggurat of Ur, which is one of the funniest sounding city names ever. So this is created about 2000 BC. Now, the thing about it is, though, a lot of certain historians believe, of course, that the inside room that was inside of it was actually for offerings and food for the gods. And the very famous ziggurat is possibly believed to be the Tower of Babel, which was built to be over 100 meters above ground and 91 meters at the base, right? Now, there is a relation, of course, to this story, being that we believe that it has interactions in the Old Testament, right? So, due to the fact that Mesopotamians actually had direct interactions with a small group of people that originated from an area called Canaan, known as the Hebrews, right? And the Hebrews, of course, invented Judaism, and there's a good chance that the story of this large tower that was built to be maybe possibly a communication tool with God also reflects the original purpose of the ziggurats, to try and bring man closer to where they believed God was, like Enlil and Ishtar being above them, right? So very, very cool when you think about it, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about, there we go. Okay, so, no, come back. There we go. No, there it is. All right, I gotta move. There we go. Now I gotta move myself back over here again, and there we go. All right, so, no, stop it. All right, so here we go. The Sumerians, right? So really, really quickly, do not let me forget to draw on my smartboard and or bring up a map for you in the next day or two so I can explain this a little bit further. But first of all, this is what I've been talking about this whole time. So remember, Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means between two rivers, right? It is a huge swath of land that is also known as the Fertile Crescent, right? But it's a big region that contained inside of it a bunch of other smaller city-states that did their own things, had their own laws, had their own customs, and then would kind of try to attempt to take over one another and control the entire area known as Mesopotamia / the Fertile Crescent, to try and have dominance above others, of course, for economic opportunities as well, things like that. So as history progresses past like simple civilizations, now you've got some powerhouses popping up inside of Mesopotamia. The biggest one, the ones that I like the most, other than the Babylonians, which I think are also really cool, is the social, the economic, the intellectual basis of the Fertile Crescent, the Sumerians, all right, from a place called Sumer, which is actually very, very close to where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers dump into the Persian Gulf on the south side of Iraq, southeast side of Iraq, close to modern-day Kuwait, all right? So they had irrigated fields that produced 3 huge crops: barley, dates, sesame seeds, right? Now, sesame seeds were actually used to make some primitive forms of flour and stuff, even though, ironically enough, the human palate cannot taste anything of a sesame seed, except they taste kind of just like it just tastes bland, right? So, because we actually can't detect it, okay? So we only use them as decorative like things on like rolls and things anymore. Now, barley though and dates are very, very big. Dates, of course, being a fruit that my wife is absolutely obsessed with, and then barley being another like a grain, a cereal base that you can actually use to create breads and different things like that. Now, irrigated fields, very important thing. So let's talk about this real fast, all right? Because it all has to do with the base thing. Oh, we got to do it. We got to do it. We got to use the newfangled, wait. Is that? Yeah, smart board. All right, so really quick. So the way this whole thing worked, right, is irrigation systems were built upon canals, dikes, dams, and drainage systems, right? To make this easier to remember, if you want to, you can actually sub out the word canal for the word ditch, and then they all start with D, right? And parents, if you're watching, no, it's not meant to be sounding anything like cuss words. It's just inconveniently close to them, right? So ditches, dikes, dams, drainage, right? Because here's the thing. Let's say hypothetically here is the Euphrates River, right? Okay, here the Tigris River, okay? Now here's the problem. You do not want to set up your city-states or your fields right on the edges of any of these because of the natural levees that exist there, right? Different things like that. And also, it's creating a very, very dangerous area because if the river floods, then what happens to your farm, exactly like this eraser, it's gone, right? So instead, let's say hypothetically, like, who am I going to pick on? Let's say Tori, right? Tori Register, right? She wants to set up her farm a little bit more like right here. But the problem is you've now got a huge amount of space that you have to try and figure out a way to get your water to flow to your farm because you're not about to go like create bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket. You're not going to go get that. It's going to take too much time. You're going to end up dead. It's a big, big, big problem when you're living in an arid, humid kind of desert, or not a humid, but an arid, dry desert climate. So instead, what they're going to do is upriver on either one of them. They're going to build these things like a dike, a dam, a ditch, or a drainage system, and they're going to divert the water so it brings it directly to the farm itself, right? Now, the big differences between these words, first of all, a dam, of course, is just a solid wall, right? Now, a dike, on the other hand, is like a doorway. It can actually be opened and shut, right? So, and then, of course, ditches being like our canal systems, and drainage systems being so that it doesn't oversaturate our farmland, right? So that's an irrigation system. That's how exactly it works, okay? So it looks like I don't have to worry about explaining it heavily because I just explained it just now. So anyway, they also are going to develop cuneiform, the writing style we also talked about. They are going to invent the wheel. They're going to have an abundance of food that leads a steady increase of population, farms, towns, cities. They're also going to develop a very intricate trading system, right, with bartering. Now, they mainly bartered with things like barley, but also wool, cloth for stone, meat, metals, timber, copper, pearls, ivory, things like that. So it was a direct barter system, right? Now, barley became known as like one of the very first currencies, right? Mesopotamians are actually going to end up calling them shekels at one point to actually kind of give like a currency level to a certain unit number of barley. Like, oh, give me 6 shekels for this, right? So it's an early basis of a money-based economy. Even though, ironically enough, the Persians were the very first people to invent the money-based economy under their king named Darius the First, right? So anyway, now, then we had these other people that popped up for about all of 8 seconds, all right? The Acadians, right? They had this leader named Sargon the Great, all right? He unifies lower Mesopotamia after conquering the Sumerians in 2331 BC. Hooray. They're going to establish their capital called Akkad. Nice. They're going to spread Mesopotamian culture. Well, that's the one thing that the Acadians did do for us, right? Is that war and trade, cultural diffusion, right? It's going to spread everything a little bit. Now, however, though, very short-lived dynasty due to the fact that the Acadians were conquered by the invading barbarians known as the Babylonians in the 2200s, right? So now, Babylonians, though, over a large amount of time, are going to end up uniting. Nope, go back. All right, so end up uniting a very, very large portion of the Fertile Crescent, right? They're going to unite it all together and rename their, there we go, their state that of Babylon, right? Now, Babylon is something you've definitely heard of before, even probably in religious class, right? Now, religion class. So Babylonians are going to reunite Mesopotamia in 1833 under their Amorite king by the name of Hammurabi the first, right? The sixth Amorite king who conquered Akkad and Assyria, north and south. King Hammurabi's amazing contribution to history is something that, ironically enough, is not very fair, right? But he is the sixth Amorite king. He's going to build new walls to protect the city, new canals, dikes to improve crop rotations, things like that. He's going to create an economy based on agriculture, wool, cloth, a taxation system. He's going to create an efficient taxation system as well. Individuals were allowed to own land around cities. Artisans and merchants are going to keep most of the profits and even form guilds and associations. Grain is going to be used, there it is, shekel, right? Grain is going to be used as a medium of exchange. It's the emergence and measurement of currency. A shekel is in 180 grains of barley. A mina, 60 shekels, right? Now that's another thing too. They actually created this thing called the base 60 system. Mesopotamians, under the rule of Babylon and under the rule of King Hammurabi, actually created a system that is a mathematical constant where everything is based off the number 60, right? So 60 shekels, 180 grains, 180, like, you understand what I'm saying? Give me X number of shekels. But here's another crazy one. That's where we get our 60 seconds, makes a minute, 60 minutes makes an hour, right? So mina, though, also eventually is going to represent by metals, which is one of the first uses of money. It'll still be based on grain. But here's Hammurabi's big legacy. A lot of y'all are really big tryhards, right? A lot of you probably, some people like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to think of it. Oh, like maybe Brittany just went by and just copied this entire thing down. It's not 100% necessary, right? It's some very cool stuff, and you can definitely just like snip it up. You can be like economy based on agriculture, wool and cloth, grain used as currency. You can throw the word shekel in there or whatever. But the big thing you need to know is Hammurabi's legacy, and that is in his code of law, right? Known as the Code of Hammurabi. But what I want you to do, don't write this, because I want to finish this up in class tomorrow, all right? I love talking about Hammurabi. We're going to do a little like kind of a little borderline skit thing. We're going to act a couple things out, all right? But I'll see you guys then. So go ahead and stop on the last one. And we're going to start with Hammurabi tomorrow. So I'll see you guys then. Have a great evening. Looking forward to it, guys.